morning. I am Christophe Garnier, founder of Spark Labs, a growth ecosystem dedicated to foreign tech startups expanding to the US market. And today I have three speakers with whom we are going to discuss how ecosystems and their functions are contributing to our collaborative economy and how they're contributing to the growth of the New York ecosystem. So first, ladies first, I'm going to let you guys introduce yourself. What do you do, and who are you, and what are you doing for the contribution to the New York ecosystem?
Sure. Thank you so much for having me. My name is Jessica Singleton. I'm the Chief Digital Officer for the City of New York. And I work actually for the woman who just spoke, Deputy Mayor Glenn. But together and with Mayor de Blasio, we are focused on making New York City the #1 place in the world for innovative people and companies. So I'm happy to talk a lot more. I hope we'll talk a lot more about the great work we're doing to support that. The other piece of the work that the Office of Digital Strategy that I lead, we're also focused on improving New Yorkers' user experience with government and also tourists, anyone who comes to the city. We want to make sure that the city of New York is just a click or a swipe away on a phone or sort of on any device you're using, and making sure that the city is as in sort of engaging and open and transparent with residents as possible.
Thank you. Benoit.
Hello, my name is Benoit Grossman, and I am running a venture capital fund based in Paris called iBusiness Partner. So investing mostly in technology. We invest only like in European-based companies, but what we do, like in the US, we like to invest in European company, and we try to relocate the company in the US. It can be like either on the East Coast or West Coast. So each time the choice depends on the company. So of course, as you all know, I mean, East Coast and New York is the place to be because we are very close to media company. Sometimes it's much better to be on the West Coast, so it depends. And we have a few companies on our iBusiness portfolio. We are located in New York, and we are strongly supportive of this company, and we try to help them to grow in the US and to take a big market share.
Excellent. Ed?
Hi, I'm Ed Zimmerman, and I'm the partner in charge of the tech group at Lowenstein Sandler, which is one of the 5 most active law firms in the nation in venture and growth equity. I also teach venture capital and angel investing in the MBA program at Columbia, where I've taught for about a decade, and I've published about 80 columns on the blog pages of the Wall Street Journal, where I serve as part of their panel of experts. I'm an angel investor in about 80 companies, and personally an LP in about 3 dozen families of venture funds, and do a lot with French companies and spend a fair amount of time in Paris as well.
Excellent. So we have obviously many entrepreneurs here that are either already expanding here or planning for US expansion. So the first question that comes to mind is why New York versus San Francisco? This is the first question I get, at least, when I get entrepreneurs coming to visit and check it out. They check out usually both places. So what's your take on how to choose New York versus San Francisco?
Would you like, I'm obviously going to be biased, so I'm happy to start. To me, the answer is really simple. It's density, it's diversity, and it's industry expertise. So I think that those are the 3 pillars on which New York City is really poised to become the global capital of tech and innovation. And I think that as you've seen the growth, both in terms of investment dollars, in terms of the number of startup funding requests also, we actually beat San Francisco in startup funding requests in 2015. So I think that sort of the way that you measure the rate of growth of an ecosystem and the way that you're measuring sort of the maturation cycle of an ecosystem, you're starting to see New York already beginning to surpass Silicon Valley on a number of metrics. But I think that what's most important is that technology is changing, and the application of technology in our daily lives is ubiquitous. It's also becoming sort of less of an application layer and more embedded into everything that we do. And what better place to test and experiment than in a city as dense and as diverse and as full of industry expertise as New York.
Thank you. Benoit, you've been investing for 15 years.
Even more than 50
even
years.
more than 50
Long
years.
time ago, so.
You have companies that have expanded in
Yeah.
both coast. So what is
So unfortunately, there is no right answer between East Coast and West Coast. Of course, each time it depends on the company. Being located in the West Coast, okay, everything I'm going to tell you it's kind of obvious. Being on the West Coast, you are close to Silicon Valley. The historical, you are close to Facebook, Google, the world. New York, East Coast, you are more closer to media companies. Of course, it depends each time the company you want to expand. And also for European-based company to be located in the East Coast is much more convenient because East Coast is just in midway between West Coast and Europe. It's kind of obvious. Communication, you get like 6 hours difference instead of 9 hours difference, which is like huge difference. And so this is why more and more people are prefer to be located in this area rather than the West Coast because it's much more convenient.
Would you say there are specific industries within the digital economy that are more geared towards one coast to another?
Definitely, when you have media space, I mean, all the big media companies are located on the East Coast, either New York or on the East Coast. And if you want to be closer to the Google, to the Facebook, to the pure player in the internet, and the West Coast is better. Of course, you get venture capital, you get all the venture capital from the Silicon Valley in the West Coast, but there is the advantage of being located in the East Coast.
Would you say there is a stage at which it's easier to seek funding in one coast rather than
I don't think so. I don't know. Not my feeling, but
And do you have any input on that?
So, first of all, you choose New York over San Francisco for 2 reasons. Bagels and pizza. It's really not a close call. I would expect that French people would know this and without having even asked the question. I'm a little disappointed. But in addition to that, I want to go to what one of the CEOs I work with, a guy named Hicham Giri, who has French roots and grew up overseas and raised venture capital from the West Coast more than from New York. And I wrote about him in Forbes last year. And Hicham said he's got a big data enterprise company. So not a consumer app, not a fintech company. There's really no reason why a fintech company would want to be anywhere other than in New York or London, in my view. But he's got an enterprise company in big data and needs a lot of engineering talent. And he said that what he learned was he could be close to the customers that were going to matter to him, or he could be close to his existing investors. And he chose to be close to the customers. And when Jesse talked about the density in New York, everyone has an excuse to be in New York. There's fantastic lift in and out of New York. So whether you're a media company in LA, you're going to find yourself in New York. If you're a hardcore tech company in San Francisco, you're going to find yourself in New York. The political world is going to find itself in New York. London, Paris, Berlin, the tech centers in Europe, the Nordics are also amazing tech centers, and Israel are also going to find themselves in New York. And it's that proximity from a flight time and for company culture from a time zone perspective. 9 hours versus 6 hours does make a big difference in our experience. And 10 years ago, because I've been working in New York in venture and tech for 25 years, 10 years ago, 15 years ago, New York was not the right answer. We knew it, and the term sheets that we were negotiating were premised upon the company leaving New York upon receipt of funding.
So there is a big
That is not the case anymore.
And talking about how New York has grown to what it is today in terms of ecosystem, a lot of changes have happened in the past 5 years, both on the private side and the public side. What on the private side, which you know very well, you're contributing to a lot of different things with your different events and your private investment firm. What are you doing in order to contribute to that ecosystem, and what do you feel are the main initiatives in the private sector that have contributed to make the ecosystem what it is today?
So I think there's a confluence of things that the private sector will be doing, and of course I'll let you talk about the public sector initiatives. First of all, we've seen a proliferation of funds up and down the stage spectrum come into New York. Whether it's a fund like Lyra Hippo Ventures which also has a French named partner in the fund, or funds like Greycroft, which have now become very established national brand names. You're seeing a real influx of capital that did not exist in New York 10 years ago. There's also a very active angel community, which is in part an outgrowth of some of the exits that we've had. So my friends and I led a seed round in a company called Tapad, which was acquired by a European company. That returned a fair amount of cash, almost all of which is being plowed right back into investing in startups and venture funds. And that company is now doing all sorts of strategic initiatives in New York. There are a lot of success stories like that in New York, which we didn't have 10 years ago. Some of the things that we're doing, we at Lowenstein, my friends and I started something called Venture Crush. And there are 3 core components. There's our annual Venture Crush event in New York, and another one in San Francisco. We just had San Francisco last week. We had about 950 people there. We had about 1,000 people in New York. There's our accelerator called First Growth, which has had a lot of big companies like Moda Operandi, Birchbox, OpenFin, Skillshare, BaubleBar, a bunch of others come through. And then the third component is something called Angel Vine, which is 200 or 300 people several times a year getting together. Usually 50 of them are venture investors and angel investors meeting with founders. And so the programming that we do like that, or like our First Growth program, those are things that we hope, with no strings attached, no cost, no speaking of equity, that we hope are beneficial to the ecosystem and the community in New York.
And there are just a few examples among many others in New York. Jessica, on the public side, some initiatives that have been triggered the past 12 months.
Yeah. Well, and in the last 2.5 years since I've worked in government, I can speak to some of those. So I think what's interesting about government is that we obviously can do things at scale and very quickly, but we can sort of take our own assets and invest them in programs. We mentioned the tech talent pipeline. We've also done a lot with real estate to open up sort of underused space in the city and make it available to the sort of spatial needs of new economy.
Co-working spaces for startups, accelerators?
I think co-working spaces, but also, I mean, the private market is doing a lot to support that. We've actually, and you saw, I think, some slides a few minutes ago, but we're starting to actually transform old waterfront space in the Brooklyn Navy Yard. This was a place that employed 70,000 people who were building ships in the previous centuries, and now we're actually totally gutting and redeveloping the space to make it actual workable space for prototyping and modern manufacturing, sort of the next wave of the innovation economy. So really doubling down on existing assets in New York that can be retrofitted and made appropriate, more appropriate and fitting for the new economy. And then, of course, reallocating workforce dollars. I think that one of New York's other core strengths that I'm sort of, when I talk about density and diversity, I think that this is underlies all of those attributes, but is really the human capital side, making sure that that we have enough talent to support. We're sort of doubling down on New York's immense core strength of a diverse population and making sure that we have enough talent to support companies who want to start and scale here. So we do a lot of work in sort of the public-private partnership model, and I think that gives us a chance to use government dollars and private dollars, but to also do things at scale that only government can achieve. So computer science is, I think, we're really kindred. Government and the tech sector is really kindred in the sort of realization of the importance of computer science education. We became the largest school district in the country to teach computer science to every child in elementary school, middle school, and high school. And so that'll roll out over the next 10 years, but that is only possible because of an $81 million public-private partnership.
Okay, very good. Thank you very much, Jessica.
Yeah.
Benoit, everybody talks about unicorns here in the US. You are investing in that are getting very big scale. You've done it with Criteo. You're an investor in Sigfox. How do we leverage the ecosystem of New York City in order to create very scalable businesses, potentially unicorns?
Well, I don't think it will be specific to New York. I mean, the dream of every venture capitalist is to, of course, to make money and to finance what we call unicorn company. There is no secret to do that. There is no secret recipe. Or at least the secret recipe is to have like a good entrepreneur at the helm of the company. And most of the time, the unicorn is a unicorn because the entrepreneur is the right person to do the job for this kind of company. So, unfortunately, there is no secret to do that. You can build some unicorn in Europe, in Paris, in London. You can build either in New York or on the West Coast. There is no recipe. You just need to have a good entrepreneur to get a good market opportunity, to get some venture capitalist who believe in the team and in the company, and to support the company, to give them some money, and just to make sure that the company will go in the right direction. So there is, obviously, unfortunately, there is no magic stuff.
Do you believe that there are some very specific industries and fields here in New York that are geared towards building very large businesses?
You know, it's an interesting question, and people several years ago were thinking that New York had these narrow categories in which we had expertise. And so you might look at Rajiv Thomas, whose poster is right there, who's the founder and CEO of Sprinkler. And we met Rajiv probably 8 years ago, and we've been his counsel ever since, and that is one of the mega unicorns in New York, if we're still using the term. And that's, you know, a social media listening media tech company, and a really important company. They've been acquisitive, they've raised a lot of capital, they've created many jobs right here in New York for tech people. But then you look at something like Nat Turner and Zach at Invite Media, who had this little startup that was a digital media ad tech company that was then acquired by Google. Google has a big office here, which has been fantastic for New York. I think they're a really important partner for New York. And they stayed, and a year later they left, and they said, forget ad tech, we're going to now focus on bringing together the world's cancer data. And they started a business about 3 years ago called Flatiron Health. So from ad tech to cancer data, they are blocks away from where they did Invite Media, but not very far away, right here in the city. And at the end of last year, they announced a $200+ million growth round led by a strategic pharma company based in Europe. And that's the kind of New York success story that doesn't seem all that obvious 3 years ago, and perhaps the press and the perception in the public hasn't quite caught up. I'm really proud that we incorporated Flatiron Health. I was an investor in Invite Media. Google invested in Invite Media. I was an investor in the earliest rounds of Flatiron Health as well. And I think those are the kinds of great companies that aren't necessarily top of mind initially, but once the New York Times publishes the story about that massive growth round, they become top of mind.
Can you tell us more about those very large players like Google, like Amazon, like Salesforce, contributing to the New York ecosystem and what they are really doing?
Yeah, so one of the nice things, you know, I am in the fortunate position of getting to sit inside the boardrooms at large venture and growth equity-backed companies because I serve as their counsel, and they will complain about competing with Google for talent, competing with Facebook for talent, competing with Spotify for talent. And that's actually a really good thing because in sharp contrast to the monoculture that largely exists in San Francisco, meaning in San Francisco, everyone you know is in the tech industry or is 1 or 2 hops away from being in the tech industry. And in New York, your friends can be artists and musicians and in publishing and in the restaurant business. It's a very, very diverse, this goes back to what you were saying, it's a very, very diverse set of businesses that work here. And I think that when you look at some of these unicorn companies complaining about competing for talent, well, what that means is we are now a target-rich environment for the best students coming out of MIT or Caltech or NYU or Cornell or wherever, And so you've got the ability to attract and retain great talent because they also know that should they desire to change jobs or should they need to change jobs in 15 or 24 months, they can walk across the street or maybe take the same elevator but just get off at a different floor because of the abundance of talent here. And that's really important. And it also means that we are credentialing and creating really valuable experience for a lot of people who love New York.
One last question for you, Benoit. Do you believe in ecosystems becoming specific and complementary with one another? For example, Paris with a lot of talents, great education, and cheaper labor than places like New York and San Francisco, where there is a competition for talents, which is becoming very difficult for startups. Do you believe in the existence of Paris and other European destinations and ecosystems becoming lungs of developments for large ecosystems like New York and San Francisco, for example?
Yes, definitely. I mean, everybody is saying that France has good engineers, that it's much cheaper to do R&D in France than doing in the US. First, it's a question of salary, but not just the salary, it's because French employees are much more loyal to their employers than the US counterpart. You know, the Silicon Valley people, I mean, especially engineers, that are switching jobs like every week, not every week, but they can switch jobs just to get like a 5 or 10% increase of salary, which is not the case in the US. And so this is the first point. And also, like in France, you know, there is quite a lot of subsidies to finance the R&D, what we call crédit d'importation, which is the tax credit. Basically, the government will give you some tax credits if you hire some engineers, which is very nice. Meaning that R&D is much cheaper in France than in the US. And I guess it's a model for all of our companies that we try to export in the US. Most of the time, the R&D stays in Paris or somewhere in France. And the BizDev, the marketing and the CEO move to the US because the US is the right place to do business. R&D is too expensive, and in France it's just the opposite. So you have to take the best of both worlds, and doing like that, it's working quite nicely.
And it sounds like it's becoming almost an asset to have your development teams back in Europe.
Definitely.
For investors because of that problem, because if you lose your CTO, you lose your VP engineering, you're in trouble. So it's a gauge of security as well. Do you agree as being an investor in many companies? Do you a problem keeping your resources?
I have not heard a single American investor say that it's an asset to have a tech team in Europe, nor have I heard them say it's an asset to have a tech team in France. It is half the price to have a tech team in France because compensation in France is lower than it is in New York or the Bay Area. It is also very understood that France has some of the best technical talent anywhere in the world, and we do understand how the R&D credits work. France also has the benefit in the current administration of amazing people like Minister Axel Lemaire, who's just before us, who understand the importance of internationalizing and globalizing the best tech companies coming out of France, just as we understand the importance of acquiring amazing companies in Europe. A company like LiveIntent, which just acquired a company in the Nordics as well as in Germany. LiveIntent is another great New York-based company with about 300 employees globally now, and it's becoming acquisitive, and that's the best way to enter Europe. So I think that there are still explanations required. Those explanations are easier to make to the New York investment community than to the California investment community, simply because in California there is so much density of investment opportunity that there is definitely a little bit of a pull to say, you know what, we can invest locally. That's a really long flight. And in New York, there's a bit, we New Yorkers, and I grew up in Brooklyn, we New Yorkers have a chip on our shoulder. And we say, we're going to work harder, we're going to fight harder, and we're going to do more. And so we're okay getting on a plane. And if the folks in California are going to be complacent about the opportunities that exist proximate to where they live, then we are going to outdo them by getting on planes, by understanding what's going on in France. So, for me,
il y a 6 ans, Martin et moi avons acheté un appartement dans le 7e arrondissement. We love France. I love going there. I invested in my first French venture fund, which is a fund called Daphne, run by Marie Eklund and some of her colleagues. And you know, we've been welcomed very warmly each time we've walked into the Parisian tech community.
Thank you very much, guys. We're out of time, so thanks for that.
Thank you. Thank you all. Thank you for joining and thanks for your help making this event a success. So we